Republicans value hate speech a lot more. Republicans think there should be a lot less restrictions on hate speech.
Sticks and stones may break my bones. You learn that when you're 3. If you can't deal with that when you're 18, you should probably not be on the internet.
These are the things that are allowed on Meta now. Things like immigrants are gays, trans are.
Well, first off, this video is not getting monetized.
I am Brandon Clark. This is my co-host Swa Hall, and today we're meeting on Uncommon Grounds. Now, Uncommon Grounds, before we get into the topics today, this is a podcast between me and my buddy Swa here. We agree on some things. We do have a lot of like substantive, moral, or cultural disagreements, which is kind of what we thought would make for an interesting podcast, talking about current events, talking about politics from different lenses, and seeing what common ground we can find and what uncommon ground we have. Now, before we jump into the topics too much, a lot of people on my channel obviously are going to know me and my background. They're going to know Swa a lot less. They might have seen the debate that we've had. Other than that, though, he hasn't had formal introduction, so I want to give him a chance to introduce himself, and then we'll get into our topics.
Yeah, what's up, guys? Swa Hall, like you said, I did do a video on his channel. Was that almost a year ago? I feel like now. Over abortion. Obviously, he represents more of the left-wing side and me more of the right-wing side. So I was arguing from the pro-life position. Just a little bit about me. I'm obsessed with pop culture. As you can see behind me, I got some posters. I'm a cultural Catholic. I got a crucifix back there too. So I'm not a Catholic by faith, but my family's Catholic. So I kind of go through all the motions and have sort of a Catholic outlook on the world. So a lot of my views will be kind of informed by a sort of pseudo-religious view, even though I'm not religious myself. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. I have my own YouTube. It's called Pop Cultured with Swa, and links will probably be down below, I guess. So yeah, I'm excited.
That's what I was going to say. Well, we'll have your YouTubes linked in the description as well. Anyone wants to go over there and check them out. Today's topics that we're getting into, we're going to cover the LA wildfires a bit. We don't have too much disagreements on that, so I don't know how long we'll stay there. We are going to start there, though, because it's more of a trending topic. We're going to cover some of the Facebook stuff, from the fact checks to the censorship, some of the ongoings in Hollywood with the different controversies we've seen. Swa's going to fill me in on that one more, so to speak. I'm not as read up on that one. And then we'll end with a more wide-arching or broad-ranging discussion over which party censorships more or censors more, where I'll probably be supporting more Democratic side and he'll be supporting more of the Republican side. But yeah, like I said, to start with the wildfires in LA, for those who don't know, it burned in a bunch of areas, cities around the Los Angeles area. Over 130,000 people were evacuated. As of the last I checked, 5 were confirmed dead. Obviously, that number is subject to change, especially by the time this podcast comes out. Schools, houses, buildings were destroyed. I have my opinions on it, but Swa, I figured we could start with you. What are your takes? I'm sure you send your condolences to the victims. And
yeah, absolutely. Obviously, horrible atrocity to happen to anyone. I would never wish anyone's house to burn down. A big thing for me throughout this is, even though obviously it's California, so we're talking about a place for a right winger that's, you know, not exactly my favorite state in the union here, but to still just keep in mind that these are people, and even though a lot of celebrities we've heard of, like I think Mel Gibson, while he was on Joe Rogan, his house burned down, and it's like, man, like I understand these guys are rich, but it's still brutal. Like, one family, I forget which celebrity it was, they'd had that home for 30 years. Like you still got to think of the humanitarian aspect. As far as the causes go, we could talk about climate change, obviously. We can talk about any sort of government failings. We can talk about, you know, why isn't there more water? Why isn't there more staffing? There's a lot of stuff to kind of pick apart. But me personally, I'm at the moment more interested in what can America do to come together for, you know, our brothers and sisters in California who are really scared right now.
I completely agree. I think that in times like this, unity trumps everything else. Trump, you know, funny word there, talking about unity, Trump, but unity overall. I think that's why Biden, I don't know if you were aware, Swal, but Biden did come out and say that for 180 days, that 100% of the costs will be covered by the federal government.
That's, awesome. I actually did not hear that.
That's awesome. From debris removal to like food and shelter for those affected. Obviously, after 180 days, Trump would be in office. It would be up to him to continue. I'm not saying he
Right.
wouldn't, obviously. I mean, he has been a little suspect about AIDS some places. Hopefully, he would keep it going, though. And this is something that
Supposedly he's America first, so
you would hope.
one would hope.
Yeah, it's just his hatred for Newsom kind of makes me like, and the one thing that I do want to point out before we move over the past the subject is, and I've talked about
Sure.
this on my channel in different videos. I think it's important that misinformation kind of about these things, especially when people are still suffering from it, to like try to like spread lies to make it a political thing is really
Hmm.
disingenuous. Like
Hmm.
the water tanks weren't empty. This isn't because of some water restoration deal, like Trump says.
Right.
Endangered fish that Newsom wants to save. Like the water tanks were full. It was more of a water pressure thing. To me, it seems like climate change kind of makes wildfires, well, not seems, but it does make them burn stronger, longer. They come earlier in the season. I mean, it's January, right? We're talking about this in January.
Hmm.
So it's like these kind of effects are going to strain the resources more. So I think the discussion is, how do we prepare for these better going forward?
Sure. And of course, on my side, we don't have to make this whole thing about climate change, but I'm not a climate change denier, just so everyone knows that. I do think it exists. How much I care about it is where we would probably disagree. My interests would lie in, okay, knowing that the climate's changing and getting hotter and getting warmer. And, we just had, we're in Indiana, we just had our first snow of like the whole winter almost
Yeah.
like a week ago, like
Mhm.
the first time, and it's January. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Is in preparing, knowing that information of, okay, given that everything's hotter, sea levels are rising, yada, 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 how do we prepare knowing that? Whereas I assume you would be more in the camp of let's try to prevent the climate change, where I would be more, let's adapt to the climate change. We're humans, we're good at adapting. That's like our one skill. um,
Yeah, I think that's
but
a
yeah.
completely fine position to hold. In a discussion for a different day, yeah, I would probably argue the need for preemptively trying to prevent
Mhm.
these rather than reacting to them when they happen. But I do think where we could find common ground, I guess, to call to our name is that we should be better prepared at the least knowing this information
Absolutely.
when it
On
happens.
all levels, like you said, on the climate change stuff, and whether we need to hire another 20 firefighters for each, whatever,
Yeah.
all across the board, we need to be more prepared. So
Yeah,
yeah,
because
I
people
agree.
shouldn't be having their houses burning. Like to the best of the
No.
ability, we can prevent that. Yeah. So then onto the Facebook stuff. We have the fact checks and the censorship. Let's kind of start with the fact checks. I know they kind of go together. Again, kind of wondering your perspective. I guess just to for anyone who doesn't know, Zuckerberg came out. It was like he came out before the Joe Rogan interview, but it went
Yeah,
mainstream
like a
once he
day
did the
before.
Rogan interview. And he's changing his rules pertaining to what's allowed on the platform. He's changing the fact checks, his fact checks that he's been doing since I think like 2014, 2015. They've been around for
Hmm.
a while now. He called them too political. He said that he's getting rid of them. He wants to turn it to a more free speech platform. Your thoughts, Swall? I
Yeah,
have an opinion on that for sure.
I
So
do find it funny the timing because
yeah.
I was a little distracted. I don't know the exact uh situation surrounding everyone kind of getting mad at Elon like in the last couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I think a bunch of accounts got taken down or
Yeah.
something like that happened on X. I wasn't really paying attention. And I feel like it was like 6 days later, Zuckerberg was like, we're a free speech platform, which kind of makes it feel really like it makes it feel political. It makes it feel fake. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
seem natural to
Mm-hmm.
me. However, as a more, I'm not a libertarian, but I do lean less government. I'm okay with cutting back on censorship for sure. As far as
Well,
the
the fact
fact
checks weren't
checking
done by the
goes,
government. Oh, yeah, yeah. I guess you were going to disagree. I was going to say the fact checks
oh
were done by the government. So
no, no, yeah, I just mean censorship in general. I'm a big fan of free speech. So obviously the fact checking was done by them and their own fact checkers. But uh, as far as getting people banned and censoring, I know that's kind of a different side of it. Uh, I definitely am in support of them pulling that back. When fact checkers, I don't want misinformation. People are really dumb, so I don't.
yeah.
I do understand that concern, but that's why I like the community notes that X does, where immediately, I mean, people will go and embarrass you and put community
So
notes to make you look dumb
So
if you say something
I actually
false.
have a couple pushbacks to that. I actually really
Okay.
disagree with you here. There's a couple
Oh no.
things.
Okay.
First off, the fact checks by Facebook aren't done by Facebook. They're done by third-party, nonpartisan organizations. They're all
Sure.
across the world. They're in different countries, these kinds of things. Meta doesn't actually have a say on like what gets fact checked or anything. They might send things to their fact checkers to be like, hey, verify or unverify
Right.
this. But it's not Facebook themselves. The next point, you said community notes. I actually think community notes is a far less adept program. I think it has a lot of failures. For instance, a lot of people don't know how community notes work, but all you have to do to make a community note is have been an X user for at least 6 months and then have no violations on your account. And then when you make a note, you just need 5 people. I think it's like 1 or 2 have to be someone who is from the other opinion, but you only need 5 people to rate that note as helpful. So it's not even, you're not coming from a consensus of factual, where meta fact checks are like going directly to sources. They're going to link credible verified sources. On X, if 5 people agree that drinking Clorox could solve cancer, that would be on a community note of someone who says there's not a cure for cancer. So I think that like,
Sure, but
slippery
and maybe
slope.
I've just never encountered them, but all the ones I encounter, they have the link. Like you can't just say you can drink chloride without providing a link, to my
Well, yeah,
knowledge. There has to be somewhere where you're sourcing that information from.
that is a fair
So it's
enough
not
point.
like you can just make stuff up. But I think I was also kind of conflating, and my bad if I made it sound like I'm talking about the actual like algorithms and stuff for taking people's posts down. That's from Meta, not the actual fact
Okay.
checkers. Like what is it, like Reuters? Isn't that the
Yeah.
name of one of them? No, I
Mhm.
wasn't talking about those companies. I just mean I watched his video right before we hopped on here, and he said there's like a filter, and he's pulling back the filter a little bit because basically he said I think it was like 1% or 10% of the posts are like that they take down or they shouldn't have. And
Mhm.
he's like, when you scale that up to how many users we have, that's like a million posts. And he's like, that's just is too many. So he's bringing that back and going to try to rely on reporting. So if somebody's offended, if somebody calls them a slur and reports it, then it'll probably get taken down. But just them, because
So
you might. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just going to say my biggest thing is I think there's a lot of utility with fact checks. I was looking up a couple of things before we hopped on here too, and I saw studies that show that fact checks reduce objectively false beliefs, things like obviously like the earth is flat, these kinds of things like that objectively verifiably are false. It
Right.
reduces those. And then on Facebook specifically, studies have found that misinformation gets 6 times the clicks that factual real news does, or like objective
Yeah.
reporting. So it seems to be like a big problem on Facebook. I think in the entirety of the sphere of social media, it's a big problem. And as it becomes more and more of like the public town square, I think that's like the
Hmm.
rhetoric you hear a lot, where people handle their discourse, their disagreements. We have to have some sort of like, okay, we can't let anything fly in here. Like, do you at least agree with that? Like in court, we wouldn't let someone just bring in whatever, right? So like if we're handling
Yeah.
disagreements on Facebook instead of court, like a civil court or something, I think there should be some sort of a same standard.
Yeah, it's really a fine line, especially when you get to companies that are this big, where obviously, you know, it's a owned company by Zuckerberg. He should be able to more or less do what he wants. Like it's his company, it's his site. He invented it. I mean, more or less, if you've seen the social network.
Yeah.
But obviously, yes, I do have a concern about, especially like during COVID and stuff, where people were just posting,
Yeah.
I mean, just absolute
Ridiculous.
nonsense.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not sure what the best way to police that is. And maybe it is to have fact checkers. But what I do support is it's his company. If he decides that he doesn't want that, then like I don't think the government should come in and be like, you have to. That's really what I am against. So from my own standards, if I had a website, would I have fact checkers? I probably would. I probably would.
Mhm.
But do I think we need to like force Zuckerberg to do this or whatever? I don't. I think it's his platform. He can do what he wants. So
I think we're close to an agreement then. I also don't know how much I would want like the government ruling like the hammer over these companies, but I would be fine with some sort of a regulation where like companies have to self-impose some sort of a fact-checking principle or something of the sort, where
just
it's
a
still,
system.
yeah, exactly, where it's still under the company's control, like the government doesn't have a say over it, but the government's just there to say like some system has to exist. But then yeah, going into the censorship aspect of it, I need you to tell me why things like, because these are the things that are allowed on Meta now. Things like immigrants are gays, trans are. I need you to tell me why these things are good to be allowed on Facebook now, because I think some censorship is good, right?
Yeah, well, first off, this video is not getting monetized, so thanks for that.
I'll blur
I mean,
those.
it's your
I'll blur
channel.
those out. I'll blur them out. I'll beep it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I don't care. I was just joking. And then second of all, the main reason to me for that is then you know who to block, who to never talk to, who to not invite to Thanksgiving dinner, because Uncle Mike was out here blurting slurs on Facebook on Thursday, and so he's not longer invited. If we make it impossible for people to like display themselves as the asshole or as the racist guy, then we're never going to know who these people are. So I am 100% down. If people want to go on there and post something that belligerent and that stupid and that racist, that's just your own downfall as far as I'm concerned. Good luck going to work tomorrow, bud. When somebody shows your boss, like that's why it doesn't bother me in the slightest.
So, all right, I want to preempt what I'm going to say by saying I think that that is probably the most respectable take that you could have for being for that. Now, I want to get into what I want to say. I think that's a bit of a privileged take to have, right? Because essentially you're saying that like it's fine that people are being discriminated against because at least I'll know like who I want to be around or who I'll want in my friends groups. Like it doesn't matter if these people are getting discriminated against because at least I can get rid of that person in my life.
Sure, but sticks and stones may break my bones. You learn that when you're 3. If you can't deal with that when you're 18, you should probably not be on the internet. That's the way I look at it.
I
Like
don't know.
I actually I think you can relate because you're mixed, right?
Yeah.
So my son's mixed. My wife is white. I only recently have gotten this since I've been in the Catholic realm on Twitter and stuff. There's a lot, you know, the Groypers. I'm sure you've heard of Groypers.
Mhm.
The Catholic Church is full of them. I mean, just full of them. They just love them. And so I post a picture of my family, and I'll obviously I blur out my child. I don't want anybody living with my kid, but and you'll get comments about, oh, she ruined her bloodline. Oh, you guys are all fat. And
I
like,
gotta hate
I mean,
people,
I'm a little
dude.
chubby, but like, oh, your family's so ugly. Why would your kid's a mutt? Like, I get stuff like that all the time. Does it suck? It does. Block, ignore, go to my job tomorrow, live my life. And I don't really see a reason why not everybody can just
Well, I think it's a
be
bit
like
different.
that.
I think the weight of words are a bit different when it's like your sense of self being invalidated, right? Like, yeah, you could get called fat and it's like that's one thing, that's your appearance. It's not like the epitome of who you are, like especially when like if we're talking about like trans people, gay people, people who already probably deal with these like internal battles of like who am I, like sense of self, these kinds of things, to then go out in the world and have other people invalidating them. I'm sure that's like a little extra hurtful to them. And to me, I think the goal with social media should always be allowing a comfortable space for the most amount of people to feel like they can have a voice. And I think as long as those parameters are being met, that any principle of free speech a company is living up to, right? If you're allowing a space for the most amount of people to feel comfortable giving a voice, and I think discrimination directly goes against that.
Sure. I guess I would say the point of social media is whatever the company decides the point is. For instance, X originally, or not X, ever since it's been X, has been supposedly to be a free speech platform. That's what Elon
So,
said.
well, my
So,
question about that is, do you think that social media is working kind of as like, I don't know, like the town square, so to speak, like where people are getting their information or handling these things now more so than in the past?
yeah, people say that a lot, and obviously we're living in the 21st century. It's hard for me to really have this view of the town square. I've never been in a town square. That's never been my life. My life has always been everything's on the internet. So it's kind of hard for me to envision it in that way. But I would say that, yeah, pretty much if you want to talk to somebody or you want to learn something, it's going to be YouTube, TikTok, Facebook,
Yeah, so
Insta,
I think
whatever.
as it like as social media gains in terms of importance, I think that like additional responsibilities being added onto it are like fine. Cause it was one thing when it was like more of a niche thing, you know, people sought their way. Like if you were on social media, you had to seek that out, right? But now it is, like you said, it's like the norm for communication. They have like a monopoly on communication, so to speak.
But what if I was in public? Now, obviously, they might it would really depend because you can go into public disruption or harassment. But generally speaking, like I got called the N-word by a homeless dude downtown one time, and like I just shrugged, I was like, oh man, whatever. At least I'm not homeless. Like I walked it off. So like we can't just start if you're saying this is replacing being out in public, well, it's not like we're just gonna go arresting people for saying slurs. Like
Well, I
we
think
don't
we
want
do.
those laws, right?
I think
You do?
well, maybe not slurs, but I think as a society, we've decided like a limit of what we will allow people to say in public. Like you can't just walk in to like an airplane and scream bomb. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, sure, but that's because you're inciting a panic. It's not the words you're saying. But if I'm calmly, it would have to be a pretty specific scenario because of things like harassment. If you're just repeatedly saying something to some
but
dude
wouldn't
and
you
you won't
say
leave him
harassment
alone.
is a bit of censorship? No, I would say that it is. Like the fact harassment being a charge, I guess, is a bit of censorship. The fact that you
Yeah,
can get in
if
trouble
if
for
if you
harassing someone.
wanted to delete somebody's account or somehow block it so they can't interact with somebody because they're like repeatedly going on their page and writing like F you dude or whatever,
Mhm.
I would support that. But just him on their own post saying like F all the well, I don't want to say F
Yeah.
all the blacks, I'll say my own people so I don't
Mhm.
get in trouble. F all the blacks. I don't think if that was on their own page, I don't think that should be censored. But if you're going to attack someone, then you can get into harassment stuff, which is just violating the policy of the platform to begin with, would be
Hmm.
my guess.
Yeah, yeah, terms of service and things like that. Okay, yeah. I mean, I think we'll probably circle back maybe to some of it when we get to the last
Right at the
censorship thing.
end.
If you want to tee up the Hollywood story, I'm here to hear
Yes.
what you got about it, and we'll discuss.
Yeah. I don't know how much you paid attention to the Golden Globes. They happened this last week, and Nikki Glaser came out, and obviously Wicked is a very popular movie right now. And then Conclave was up for Best Drama, which is a movie about the Catholic Church selecting their next pope. In the movie, spoiler alert, here's your chance to leave. The Pope is revealed at the very, very end of the movie to be intersex.
Can you also explain why that's wrong for Catholics?
Yes. Well, I'm not so sure that it is, to be
Okay.
honest, which is why I don't have a problem with this movie specifically,
Mhm.
but I'll touch on that in a second.
Mhm.
So, in Catholicism, to be a priest, you have to be a man.
Okay.
You have to be male. All of Jesus's disciples were men, and Jesus was a man. As far as I know, that's pretty much the only reasoning behind that. And then, obviously, first century Judea, women didn't really have very many rights.
Yeah.
So it would have just been insane for them to even imagine that a woman could be a priest back. And then it's continued for 2,000 years. So
Mhm.
it's part of their sacred tradition. But in the movie, he's revealed to be intersex, and he doesn't know this until he's 35 because he goes to the hospital for appendicitis or something, and they're just like doing x-rays and they find that he has ovaries. So he talks to the current pope to resign, and it's like, yeah, turns out, I'm not fully male or whatever. And the Pope is like, nah, you're not allowed to. And so then the Pope sends him or like pays for him to go to a clinic to get it removed. And then the movie starts with that Pope dying. And then we find out later that he never got them removed because he says, I think it would be of greater sin to like mutilate myself and change God's handiwork. And
Okay.
the movie is about uncertainty and about faith and doubt. And so he says, you ask for a pope who doubts and is uncertain. That's been my whole existence. So me, I think this is not an anti-Catholic movie at all. This
Mhm.
fits in with the theme of the movie. I think it's very interesting because I'm not sure how the Catholic Church can square. Is he a man? Is that a woman?
Why do
Is
you think
I'm
there
not.
was such backlash?
So I think it's because of where I do see an issue, which is usually Hollywood is pretty anti-Christian, anti-Catholic, which is the thing I wanted to touch on.
Yeah.
But it seems like everyone, like Megan Kelly, she went on the news after the Nikki Glaser thing because she made a joke where she came out in a Pope hat and sang a song called Popular instead of Popular. Um, and obviously Catholics were offended for somebody wearing the Pope hat and all that jazz. And so she said that this movie was made to embarrass Catholics. And me personally, I don't see that. But then you look at stuff like The Conjuring, which some of these movies I like, by the way. The Conjuring, The Exorcist, Road to Perdition, where you've got like hitmen wearing rosaries and saying they're doing God's work by killing people, and all of these kind of like.
So you would say that the existence of like a couple movies like that is a proof that Hollywood is anti-Christian or anti-Catholic?
Not a couple. I would just say, where is the version of the movie Noah that's biblically accurate? Where is that? Why don't we have that? Some of these stories are the greatest stories ever told.
Well,
And
I
all
would
we ever
say,
get is things kind of using them, but using them without like studying what the correct form is, if that makes sense. Like,
well, right, but I would think that's most movies' depiction of mostly anything. Like Hollywood is like an entertainment-driven industry, so it's like before factual recounting, it's probably like market value. Like, what am I going to make from this movie? Like, that's the bottom.
sure.
They're capitalists. Let's be like honest here. You know,
Right,
something
right,
you have
right.
a problem with. But yeah, no, it's like so it's about money, and I don't know if one. I mean, I'm sure Christians make up a large portion of America, at least like in faith,
Yes.
but in terms of like the hardcore devoted, I'm gonna buy a movie just because it's a factual retelling of a Christian story. I don't know how much of a market there is for that pertain versus like a dramatized, you know, like we're gonna add some crazy shit to it type recounting. I would think it
Yeah.
would be more so. I don't know.
Yeah. And it's less of those ones and more like, sh- I'd have to think of some other movies off the top, but
Like,
it's more like ones that show the church in a bad light. But the main issue for me is I don't think if we made this same kind of thing for Islam, I don't think that would fly at all in any
well,
sort of. I do not think we could make a movie. Like, let's say we made a movie about, I don't know how familiar you are with Islam, but Muhammad supposedly was married to a girl named Aisha. She was somewhere between like 7 and 12 years old.
yeah.
Well, he was like 30. Let's say we made a movie completely accurate to what the Quran says that depicts that truly with an actual 9-year-old actress. I mean,
Well,
people
I mean, okay, first off,
people would
you're not going to
freak
depict
out.
anything like that in any it's not that's separate from Islam. You're not depicting a relationship like that in any movie. First off, second, with
You
Islam,
shouldn't, but
well, yeah, exactly. With Islam specifically, I think it's like you wouldn't ever try to contend that like the persecution or like hatred or just oppression or whatever that Christians face in their day-to-day life is anywhere near like what Muslim or Islam people or face in their day-to-day life.
in the world, yes, I would contend that. In America, maybe not, but in the
That's
world,
crazy.
for
I don't think
instance,
in the
if
world or in America,
oh,
definitely
I mean, if you go to a Muslim country and you're Christian, they just murder you on the spot. You
right.
just
But it's
die.
like you'd have to take the
That doesn't happen
totality of
anywhere else.
well, yeah, but you have to take the totality of Muslim countries versus like the
Yeah,
totality of Christian
what? But
countries.
is there any country where you go there, you're Muslim, and they just murder you?
I don't know off
So to
top.
me, that outweighs it.
Yeah,
Like,
maybe. I mean, that's not a position I'm willing to defend. Like on the world, maybe that's something I would be willing to
yeah, but in
possibly.
America, you might be correct. I
In
might
America, I
agree
don't
with
think
you.
it's close. I mean, I know for a fact Islamophobia is the second highest hate crime. Like Islamophobic hate crimes are right behind
Sure.
like black hate crimes, white on black hate crimes.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think it's really close in America. And I think that's why, right? Like when you're trying to walk that line of like, okay, are we, you know, doing hate? Are we doing racism? It's not racism, obviously, but like prejudice,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, it's a bit of a finer line to walk. Like there, like if for instance, I think you could make more of a you could I don't what's the right way to say this? It's not punching down in the same way, I guess. It's just what I don't want to say anything,
Okay.
not want to eat my words.
Let me ask you a question about that because I thought you were going to kind of go in the direction. When it comes to obviously not all movies are comedy, but when it comes to the comedy, you said punching down. There's that whole thing about comedy is only funny if you're punching up or whatever. My stance with comedy has always been we joke about everything or we joke about nothing because everyone will always have their thing that offends them of, oh, you can't joke about. I mean, you got to remember, I understand because we all grew up here in America, which is more or less, I wouldn't say it's a Christian country, but it's like it's fundamental to the country, the Christianity, if you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
pretty ubiquitous. So, making a Jesus joke really isn't all that serious to us. But like you just, if you say that to somebody who takes it seriously, you just insulted the savior of the entire universe. Like you just insulted them. It's a pretty serious thing, but we treat it like it's not because we're so used to it. So I think we should be able to make a movie about any subject, any person, any facet of life, poor people, rich people, black people, brown people, gay people, midgets, it doesn't matter. I don't know if midgets is correct term,
Yeah.
dwarf. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Same thing with comedy. That's how I feel. How do you feel about
So
that?
it's weird. I do agree with the baseline principle of like with comedy, I don't buy into the whole like, oh, that's too far. I don't think you can necessarily go too far with comedy. I think in comedy, like a lot of people, they don't grow up like in the comedy world. And I don't mean to say that as like, oh, I was a comedian growing up and you know what I mean? Like if you
Right.
grow up around comedy, you realize really quick, like they don't have a filter. Like they literally don't care. It's just
Yes.
their culture. It's the culture of comedy. So to me, that's not a problem. I think though, you do have to be careful with like set and setting. Like for instance, I don't know if you watched Tony Hinchcliffe when he went to the Trump rally and he did
Mm-hmm.
the Puerto Rico joke, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I think it was inappropriate for him to do that at a Trump rally. I don't think the joke would have been inappropriate if he told it
If he
at
had
like
done
a
it at
comedy
like the
club.
Mora Theater, yeah.
Exactly, right? So I think it's set and setting. And I think that same principle kind of applies to movies, where once you're putting a movie up, like it's one thing if it's like a 2 DVD fucking movie or something no one's really gonna watch. But once you're like propping a movie up, it's going to be on ads, on everything you're watching, on commercials. It's going to be in movie theaters. I think you have a bit of a different standard to adhere to. And that's where I think punching down becomes wrong, because it's one thing if you're not in a position of power, like a comedian, and you're punching down, it's like whatever. But if you're in a position of power, like you're like the billionaire investing in this movie that's like, hey,
Sure.
we're gonna diss the Jews or we're gonna diss black
Right, right.
people, then it's a bit like, why are you investing millions of dollars to like make
Right.
a blockbuster movie about like black people aren't
Right.
smart or something? You know what I mean? Like, would you agree
Right.
with that maybe?
Yeah, I would. I guess part of the issue for me too, even going outside of movies, is stuff like sexy nun costumes. Like, really, what I'm saying is, I feel like it should be fairly obvious to anyone that Christianity as a whole is like the religion that like that's okay to do things with. You're not going to be seeing
Do you think
again
that's wrong though?
sexy. I don't, as long as it's okay to do it to everybody else's. If it's not, then yes, I do think it's wrong,
Hmm.
because that's my point. Is it's got to be everyone or it's nobody. Like we can't
See,
just single out just because, oh, the Christians, there's more of them, so
do you hold
screw them.
that
Like
do you hold that principle with everything? Because this is the conflict I'm having, is I almost kind of agree with you when it comes to religion, but if I try to extrapolate that logic, then it's like I don't know how much I agree with that. Like I don't think it would be fine to like do a bunch of racism against black people just because someone might be like, ah, cracker, this or that. You know what I mean? I don't think that just justifies, well, let's just do racism to everyone. Or like same with like misogyny, you know what I mean? Just because like somebody might be like,
right.
well,
Well,
God.
those are all things that we don't agree with, though. We're saying we're okay with them making the jokes at the Christians. We wouldn't be okay with them making. I would hope. Well, I mean, maybe you'd be more okay just because it's less of an offensive term. But like, I would prefer a world where nobody was calling anybody a cracker or the N word,
I would
unless it
think it would be
was in
less
the way that
harmful. Yeah,
we
it's not that I
use
would
the
be
N
okay
word.
with it. I think it would be less harm being done. And like,
If the world existed without people saying cracker and stuff, you mean
well, I mean,
it
yeah,
would be less
obviously
harm?
there. No, but what I
Yeah.
mean is like, I just mean like in the act of like, if you're like calling a white person a cracker, right? You're not doing as
Yes.
much harm as
I
calling
would
a
agree.
person the N-word, right?
I would agree, but I would prefer that we didn't do either of them.
Yeah.
And I do see what you're saying where, okay, well, just because one's significantly less of an issue, that doesn't mean we can just allow for the crazy
Yeah.
one where people are just, white dudes are just going down the street calling every black guy they see. Like that
I,
would be unhinged. But yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult topic. I just think overall, it seems like this is the one religion that it just doesn't matter. Just go ahead, say what you want, and nobody's gonna do anything. Which
yeah.
might be because of the response from the Christians. Not to say that all, I don't think this at all. I don't think all people from Islam are violent or anything, but I'm not aware of, and maybe it happens in modern times, of any like, oh, you insulted Jesus and we bombed your apartment building. Like I don't know of that happening.
Oh
It
no, I
might.
mean, well, shit like that absolutely happens. I mean, don't push me for examples right now, but there was that church. What was it? The church like 8 years ago. And what were they? I'm not gonna be able to cite examples right now, but there was
Okay, so it does happen.
it does happen. I will completely concede less frequently. You know what I mean? Far less frequently.
Yeah,
But
yeah. So
yeah,
it may be in conjunction with that as to why people are more comfortable because, like, I forget what the one French comic did something about Muhammad and like didn't they get like bombed or something like 5 years ago? Whatever.
could
But
be.
there seems to be more risk of insulting certain religions or certain belief systems
I think
versus
there's
other ones.
I think there's
So
two
I think
parts
that's a
to it.
part of it.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to it. I think one, as a standard, and this is a standard I'm completely fine with keeping. I think people are more hesitant to go after things that represent minority groups. And I think Christianity, and this is just off top at least, I think Christianity is probably the only religion that you wouldn't associate a minority group with. Like obviously
Sure.
Judaism, Jews, that's a minority group. Islam would be Arabs, that's a minority group. With most other religions, it's like a minority group you're like attaching to that. And I think that might be why. And then second, I think a lot of Christians have the unfortunate, what's the word? They have the mannerisms of like they're really judgmental. You know what I mean? Like they
Sure.
really do judge people. They'll do it outwardly. And I think a lot of that makes people, when you're a judgy person, people really want to take shots at you more. And I think like culturally, that
Sure.
might have a little bit more to do with it, where people feel like, even if they're not directly like oppressed by Christians or whatever, they feel like, oh, those Christians thumbing their nose at me or whatever, you know?
Right. And last topic on this, so we can move on to the end part. But uh, you pointed out something interesting there about Islam. While you don't have to be Arab to be Muslim,
Mm-hmm.
and same thing with Judaism. Actually, you don't have to be Jewish to be Jewish,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Christianity, since its inception, I mean, if you read the Bible, go and preach to the Gentiles, the non-Jews. It was from its inception. This is for every race. This isn't about, whereas a lot of other religions are pretty locked into their culture and the country that it started, whereas Christianity started in the Middle East, but like I associate it with Rome, Europe, and America more than like
Yeah, no,
Jerusalem,
I
even
completely
though that's
agree.
where it took place.
And I
So I
just meant
do
like
see that.
associations. Yeah, I just meant like,
Yeah.
because when I think of Christianity, I mean, and I think of a straight white man. If I'm thinking, if I'm being honest, right? I
Yes.
think of like an
Right.
older straight white man, right? And then like you go down the religion, there's probably a specific race you could associate with each one.
Yes. Doesn't mean you have to be, but
Yeah,
yeah, I see
exactly.
it. So I could see that as a reason for why it might be more skewed towards Christians than others. But yeah, move on to the last topic, I guess.
Yeah. Then we're on our last one. We're going to circle back to censorship. We're just going to talk overall, which party's more censorship. I meant to do this at the beginning. I'll just do this briefly now for those who are still watching. The structure of our show, we're typically going to cover 3 topics that are like current events, and then we'll have one structured topic at the end that we know we're going to disagree and have some back and forth on. Today, it's which party does more censorship. I think it's the Republicans. I don't even think it's close. Republicans want to ban books. Republicans try to block reports that are damaging to their members. Trump has openly called for making burning the flag illegal. I mean, I have a list of things here. Like, I go down the list. I don't think it's close. I think Republicans are the only party that have openly tried to encroach on the First Amendment. And I don't think that's comparable to Democrats being like, hey, don't say slurs, pretty much.
Sure. Well, first, I guess censorship. You said burning the flag. I don't know that can go under that
It's
category. Maybe
constitutionally
it can
protected as a form of
as a
protest under the First
speech.
Amendment. Yeah, under the
Okay.
First Amendment, it's a constitutionally protected form of protest, which is an expression of speech.
Yeah, well, Trump is smoking crack on that one. That should not be illegal. In fact,
Still
that
counts
should be
though.
something.
Still
It
counts as
does. It
Republican
does. I'm just
censorship.
saying that should be something, in my opinion, that should be something to celebrate. Not somebody burning it. I mean, the ability to be able
Yeah,
to burn it.
yeah,
That's
I
something
agree.
that would I would say strengthens our country.
Completely agree.
As far as I don't see this narrative of Republicans wanting to ban books. What I see is Republicans wanting to remove inappropriate books from places where they don't belong. Like you talked about earlier with the time and set or set in place or whatever you said. Just wrong book, wrong place. Not this book can never be read by anybody. I don't think anybody on either side of the aisle has that thought, except for maybe I could see some left wing people being like, yeah, you should probably never read Mein Kampf, or yeah, you should probably never read yada yada yada. But other than that, I don't think anybody on any side is against
Well, the difference is
books
Democrats have
existing.
never called for you to not read any book, and Republicans have. Now, what I will concede is that it is seemingly a small minority of people who ban most of the books. I think when I reported on it, it was like in most of the districts, 13 people got like over 1,000 books banned in Florida, at least I think it was. But yeah, no, I absolutely think banning books out of schools is a form of censorship, especially if like we're talking about just like kids publicly being able to go to school and get knowledge. And the books they're banning are like To Kill a Mockingbird. They're banning books that just involve LGBTQ couples. And then
they're banning books that have porn in them.
Sure, which it's like, so to speak. I mean, if they have actual legitimate porn, ban the book, right? But then when you're like banning To Kill a Mockingbird, when you're what?
Oh, my bad. I'll say corn from now on.
No, you're good. Yeah, but no, when people talk about these things, it's like, oh, the book had an LGBTQ couple, we had to ban it, or the book mentioned a blowjob, we had to ban it. I don't find issue with these things. I mean, if it's an elementary school, yeah, but like because we're talking, these books were banned from like middle schools, also
middle schools and high schools, yeah.
Sex education, and I don't know how well read you are on this topic, but there's lots of data that shows the earlier that you introduce kids to not sex, obviously, but sex through the lens of sex education, like sexual education, the less likely they are to end up being a victim of sexual assault when they grow older. So like, I don't, obviously, if it's a book that's like lewd acts, you know what I mean, all about sex, probably shouldn't be in school. If it's a book that mentions a sexual act, I don't see the problem with banning it, especially when like the Bible is allowed in school. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The Bible with what's the story where the two daughters get their dad drunk and then sleep with them? You know what I mean? Like all of these are allowed in school, but the
Old Testament goes crazy.
The second it's a gay couple doing it, now it's a problem. So I think that's easily censorship. They're just trying to censor the normalization of LGBTQ.
Sure. Yeah, this is a tough one for me when it comes to the kids. Obviously, we're both parents, but I just feel like I should be in charge of my kids' education, at least involved in it.
I agree. And I completely agree. But not other people's.
Sure, but it's public school, so it doesn't work that way. It's public. It's everybody. So we're all working together. So it's just like the country. We all have to vote.
You can't tell your kid not to check out that book from the library?
No, I mean, I can. What I'm saying is if me and 70 other parents all vote for our one school versus like 10 parents who didn't, it sucks to be those 10 parents. Like, that's just how.
That's not how anything works with school, dude. If 70 fucking parents went to school right now and voted for free lunch, that doesn't mean the kids are getting free lunch. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, sure, not everything, but I mean, that's what a parent-teacher conference, or not parent-teacher conference. What do they call it? Is it PTO?
The school board meetings, pretty much.
Wherever, yeah, it's the parents are involved or whatever that's called. Like, that's the point of those things, is to hear from the people in the community. Like, we should be running our own schools. It's the Fishers High School. I live in Fishers. I should control what happens there to some degree. Not everything. Obviously, you need the principals and you need the administrators.
I don't know. I don't know how much I agree with that directly. I don't know. Because for me, it's like,
that's what our country is built on. What are you talking about? I live in Indiana. I get to control Indiana laws. If you don't like them, move to Ohio and you have Ohio laws.
Well, yeah, but a lot of things work on like a direct democracy basis. Me, I'm fine with like a school board existing, right? And I'm fine with like, if you have an issue with the school, like fix the change through electing your school board members. What I'm not for is like a couple of moms coming to school and like raising hell about LGBTQ books and then getting them banned. And I think it speaks to the larger issue of censorship, where Republicans are the only party censoring literature, which is crazy.
Sure, but you say a couple of moms, and I will be honest and say I would have to look into individual situations here. But my guess would be, for it to happen, it has to be like all the moms.
No, it's not. When I reported on
it, needs to be like the most.
I might have a couple of the numbers wrong, but when I reported on this, it was something like, and again, give or take, it was something like 13 parents in the totality of districts in Florida had accounted for 50% of the book bans. 13 parents.
But did other parents vote against them? or
Yeah,
was it?
well, I mean, I guess those would be details we had to hash out. But
That's
they
what I
brought
mean is,
the
out of the people who actually said something about the issue, what percentage of those were like, get rid of these books?
but
Because if
yeah,
it's the majority, then that's what, like, that's just democracy. Like, that's
so
just
yeah,
how it should
well,
go.
I don't want to get too wrapped up on just the book bans because we were talking about
Sure.
censorship. I am
Right, right.
curious, what has the Democratic Party done that is as much of a censorship hindrance of free speech as Trump saying burning the flag should be illegal, or that he's going to sue pollsters over polls that he doesn't like, or pull licenses from media companies that are unfavorable to him? What is the Democratic
Sure.
act of censorship that matches up to that?
So yeah, obviously a lot of this came to people's attentions during the whole COVID thing with misinformation going out, or alleged misinformation even, we'll say, because some of it wasn't out there long enough for anybody to know if it was misinformation or not. It just get taken down. Um, and then there's obviously, even now, this could be right wing, this could be left wing. You know, you earlier you said porn, so that your video doesn't get taken down. There's clearly censorship happening based off of topics we decide to cover. It's things like, I was hesitant to mention the Jews earlier because I was like, oh, I don't want to get banned for pretending to say something bad about the Jews as an example, and them thinking that I'm saying something bad.
Hmm.
So it seems to be more on social media with accounts getting banned, taken down. Obviously, there was just a couple weeks ago, we had a bunch of now I don't support the Groypers, but we had a bunch of Catholic Groypers, like some big accounts with like 36,000 followers, getting taken down. We've had obviously the Hunter Biden laptop story. Now, obviously, the government asked, and
They didn't ask,
the
to be clear.
Twitter, or yes, you're actually correct. Yeah, not that time. They have asked before, and Twitter has said no. That's what it was. But Twitter obviously did that on their own accord. However, it obviously has an
Actually,
effect on
do you want to know who
everything.
asked Twitter when they said no? Or do you remember who was the president when the DOJ asked Twitter to take down a tweet and they said no?
Oh, was it Trumpy Bear?
It was Donald Trump in 2019 asking them to take
Nice,
down a Chrissy Teigen tweet. I actually have that on my list of things here.
nice, and they said no.
Yeah,
And based, I forget the old
Jack
CEO, but
Dorsey or whatever.
Jack
Yeah.
Dorsey, base Jack.
But yeah, I know
Yeah,
to
and
what you said about social media, to that extent, I mean, Elon Musk censored Ken Klippenstein, who is a journalist. There was a JD Vance dossier about, it was like a bunch of like leaked things with his kind of how like the Hunter Biden thing was coming into this election. There was a JD Vance dossier about like his different dealings with like Chinese companies and stuff like that. And Elon Musk banned the journalist who leaked that on X, Ken Klippenstein, and then he was censoring other accounts who shared it. There's like tons of like screenshots going around of it. And then there's obviously, like you spoke to just the other week, Elon was taking people's blue checks over being critical of him for H-1B visas. Like accounts were getting
mhm.
suspended, their sponsorships were getting lost. So like even then, I don't think the Democrats, because like who can you point to? Like, I think when people talk about Democrats censoring people on social media, it's always like these like batshit crazy conspiracy theories that they can never prove, where they're like, well, this and this and this and this and this. And then like you have like clear cut evidence of Republicans doing it in front of your eyes. And it's like, we're still supposed to believe the Democrats are worse.
Well, for me, it seems like the main one with Republicans is the books, and
I
we
think
really have
burning
to
the
get into the
flag. I think
weeds.
Trump saying
Yeah, but that's
burning the
him
flag
saying
should
a
be illegal.
statement. That's not an actual thing that happened. It's just a
Well,
statement. So
it's
it's
something he
kind of
said he would make
irrelevant.
illegal. It was a policy
Yeah,
decision
he
of their
said
platform.
he said he was going to build a wall. Where's that? Okay, he says a lot of things.
Right. I mean, they're still
that
trying. They're
that
still trying years later.
they are, but I just mean that's not an actual example of something that has been censored. That's just something that he said he might, which
Okay,
I
well,
would
I
be
mean,
against. But actual things that have happened, it sounds like we've got Hunter Biden laptop and we've got some books. That pretty much seems like it's it. And then obviously
Trump.
accounts, people saying stuff, but
So Trump
that seems to be the
also
majority of it.
rather historically is known for gag orders that he did in his first administration, where he would put gag orders on members of agencies to where they couldn't communicate. He wouldn't even allow them to communicate with Congress. This went public when a memo that he directly, or I guess he probably didn't type it himself, but his administration directly sent to Health and Human Services that said, hey, you can't communicate with the public, you can't communicate with Congress. So like he's gag ordering these agencies from even talking to Congress, let alone the public. Is that not a form of censorship?
I could see it being a form of censorship. I would need to really know the laws of the government deeper
Well,
to know
to be
kind of if
clear,
that's like something that
To
we're
be clear,
supposed to
it's
be able to do?
protected.
Or
That is protected. It's the Whistleblower Protection Act protects
okay,
anyone from federal agencies from being prosecuted by the federal government for like revealing, as long as it's not obviously classified information, but like non-classified information you can talk about. And what Trump said was, hey, you can't talk about anything you do in these agencies. And he did, there's the EPA. I know he did a gag order to the EPA. He did a gag order to somebody who's doing, it was like a nuclear whistleblower, and then Human and Health Services, which is like wild. And I mean, it wasn't even allowed to go through. Like he got blocked on trying it because it was unconstitutional. But like things like that, Trump's chief of staff in 2017 literally said their administration was considering amending or changing the First Amendment to allow the White House to sue media companies.
okay, I have a question that might have us find some common ground.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree when it comes to politicians, celebrities, like people of note that we would all know, perhaps it skews right, mainly because Donald Trump is a maniac and he's allowed and he probably wants to censor all sorts of stuff. But when it comes to the individual boots on the ground, lay people of America, your average Democrat is supports removing, like you were talking about. I don't think these people should be on here if they're saying slurs. We got to take down their. It seems like across the board, in my experience, Democrats, left wing people who are voters support censorship way more than any Republican or right wing people does, because they're all free speech. If he says a F bomb or F slur, like block him, ignore him, whatever, grow a pair. I think I could maybe agree and find some common ground that I could see more examples in politics for censorship, but the actual supporters of both parties, it seems like the blue side definitely is like cares about it more, or at least talks about it more. But I don't know.
I would probably agree with you somewhat there, only because, and this is a point I'm completely fine to concede, Republicans value hate speech a lot more. Republicans think there should be a lot less restrictions on hate speech. And I think through that measure alone, maybe you could say like
Yeah.
Republican voters, because they think saying the N word on Facebook is cool, value less speech censorship. And that, yeah, but in terms of like, I don't think that's what free speech is about, right? I think like when you're talking about the essence of free speech, and this is like not to go on a long constitutional rant, but like the Bill of Rights was made as an agreement between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists to assure
Mhm.
the Anti-Federalists, the states, that the government wouldn't be able to encroach upon their rights. So if we're thinking about the
Right.
essence of the First Amendment of the freedom of speech, it is to allow the little guy a voice against the big guy. It is not to allow the big guy a voice against the little guy. So I think in that essence of like
Mm.
what free speech is supposed to embody, Democrats embody it more, because what I think, my opinion, is Democrats are fine censoring the big guy, but they want the little guy to have as much of a voice as possible, where Republicans want to censor the little guy, and then they want the big guy to be able to say whatever. And that's even on like, I'm not talking on the macro level of like rich people versus poor people,
Sure.
but even on like a micro level of like the majority group, white people being able to do racism against the minority group, you know?
Sure. Right. Yeah, I think we found somewhat a common ground there. Obviously, even though I represent and I'm representing the Republican side, I'm a right winger, but I'm not a Republican. So I would say, me personally, in my views and the
Libertarian.
people I talk to, you say what?
The libertarian.
No, no, don't say that. The people I associate and talk to would say, not only do I want the little guy to have a voice, I want the big guy, the medium guy, and all of them to just have an equal voice, and nobody to be unfairly censored at all would be my thing. But obviously, that's somewhat of a pipe dream. Like we both agreed, elementary kids shouldn't have porn books. Like there has to be some level of censorship somewhere.
Yep.
But
Yeah,
yeah.
I completely agree. I think we came to a pretty solid common ground. That'll probably be the end of this episode. We're working out the date. So whenever you see this get uploaded, that'll be the day. And then just know weekly we'll be doing episodes, same time, same day. Schwa's YouTube will be in the description. It'll be on my YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to both of us, like the video, comment, let us know what you think, and we'll see you next week.